The lunch rush at Lakeside Diner had died down to a pleasant hum when my son Arthur called. I was sitting in my usual corner booth, going over volunteer schedules for the library's summer reading program, a stack of colorful flyers spread across the worn Formica table. Outside, Lake Michigan sparkled under the October sun, and tourists still wandered Cherry Street despite the chill creeping into the air. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hey Mom, quick question. Art's voice carried that distracted tone of someone multitasking. I could hear his twin daughters chattering in the background, probably fighting over crayons again. What is it, sweetheart? I tucked the phone between my shoulder and ear, continuing to sort through the reading list proposals. Why is Aunt Helen's Toyota always parked behind Dad's office on Tuesdays and Thursdays? My pen stopped moving. The cheerful noise of the diner seemed to fade into something distant and muffled. What do you mean, always? I drive past Palmer & Associates every week on my way to the Robertson project site. For the past few months, I keep seeing her car in that back lot where Dad parks. You know, the private spaces behind the building. I figured maybe she's helping with paperwork or something, but it seemed weird she'd be there so regularly when you're always at the library on those days. My hand found the edge of the table, gripping it as my mind tried to process what Art was telling me. Helen. My younger sister by 4 years. The woman who'd been my maid of honor 36 years ago. The aunt who babysat Art when he had chicken pox. The sister who called me every Sunday without fail. And Walter. My husband of 36 years. The man who'd proposed to me at this very diner back in 1988, getting down on one knee right by the jukebox while Patsy Cline crooned through the speakers. Mom? You still there? Yes. Yes, I'm here. I forced my voice to remain steady. It's probably nothing, honey. Maybe your dad's helping her with insurance paperwork. You know Helen's never been good with financial documents. Yeah, probably. Just thought it was odd. Anyway, I've got to run. The girls are trying to give the dog a makeover with markers. Love you. Love you too. The phone went dead, but I continued holding it against my ear for several seconds, staring at nothing. Around me, life continued. Old Pete Sanderson argued with Margie the waitress about whether his coffee was hot enough. 2 teenagers shared a milkshake by the window. The cook rang the bell for order up. But something fundamental had shifted in my world, like the first crack in a frozen lake. I set the phone down carefully and looked at my reflection in the window. Dorothy Palmer, 58 years old, with silver threading through my brown hair that I'd never bothered to dye. Sensible cardigan over a floral blouse. Reading glasses on a beaded chain around my neck. The face of a woman who'd spent 3.5 decades teaching second graders, who volunteered at the library twice a week, who baked pies for church potlucks and hosted Thanksgiving for the entire family. The face of a woman whose husband might be having an affair with her own sister. No. I pushed the thought away immediately. This was Walter. Walter, who still held my hand during movies. Who brought me coffee in bed every Saturday morning. Who'd cried at Art's wedding and again when each of our granddaughters was born. And Helen, who'd just helped me organize the church rummage sale last month. Who'd sat at my kitchen table 3 days ago, eating my lemon bars and complaining about her supervisor at the medical clinic. But Arthur's question echoed in my mind. Always parked there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The exact days I spent 4 hours at the library, completely predictable, completely reliable. Everyone in Maple Ridge knew Dorothy Palmer's schedule. I'd been following the same routine for 2 years, ever since retirement had given me time to finally pursue volunteer work. I gathered my papers with hands that trembled slightly, left a $10 bill on the table for my untouched sandwich, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. My Buick sat in its usual spot across the street, and I slid behind the wheel without any clear destination in mind. My hands turned the key, and somehow the car found its way toward the east side of town, toward the modest office building where Palmer & Associates had occupied the ground floor for 28 years. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That Art had misunderstood what he'd seen. That there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But I drove there anyway. The building came into view, a 2-story brick structure with Walter's agency name on a tasteful sign out front. I pulled into the public lot facing Main Street, not the private lot behind the building. From here, I had a clear view of the back entrance through a gap between buildings. And there it was. Helen's silver Toyota Camry, parked in the space right next to Walter's Cadillac. It was Thursday. 2:15 in the afternoon. I was supposed to be at the library until 4 o'clock. I sat in my car, engine running, heat blasting against the October cold, and stared at those two vehicles side by side. How many times had Art driven past and seen this exact scene? How many months had this been happening while I sorted books and helped children select stories about adventure and magic and happily ever after? My phone buzzed. A text from Helen. Still on for Sunday dinner at your place? I'll bring the apple crisp. The casual normalcy of it made something twist in my chest. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my car and sat in the gathering cold, watching that back entrance with the patience I'd developed from 35 years of monitoring second graders during recess. 40 minutes passed. The sun shifted lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Other businesses in the building closed for the day. Cars came and went. I was about to convince myself that Art had been mistaken, that I was being paranoid, that any moment Walter and Helen would emerge separately with reasonable explanations. Then the back door opened. Walter stepped out first, straightening his tie with one hand. Even from this distance, I recognized the gesture, the same one he'd used for 36 years before heading home from work. Then Helen emerged behind him, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. She was buttoning her blouse. Not quickly, not frantically, but with the leisurely movement of someone who had all the time in the world. Walter turned back, said something that made her laugh, and then his hand reached out to touch her face with a tenderness that I recognized because it had once been directed at me. They stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, my husband and my sister, in a moment so intimate that I felt like a voyeur. Then Helen moved toward her car, and Walter called after her. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her turn back, saw him mouth something that made her smile, saw her blow him a kiss before climbing into her Toyota. I watched her drive away. Watched Walter check his watch, smooth down his hair, and head back inside, presumably to collect his briefcase and jacket before his own departure. The routine of it all suggested practice, familiarity, the comfortable choreography of people who'd done this many times before. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white. 36 years of marriage. 36 years of family dinners where Helen sat across from us, of holidays where she helped me in the kitchen, of late-night phone calls where she confided in me about her struggles with dating after her divorce 15 years ago. The divorce where I'd held her while she cried, where I'd assured her she'd find love again, where I'd encouraged her to stay close to family because that's what mattered most. How long had this been going on? Months, according to Art's observation. But what if it was longer? What if every concerned phone call, every family gathering, every sisterly confidence had been a performance while she carried on an affair with my husband? The back door opened again, and Walter emerged with his briefcase and overcoat. He walked to his Cadillac with the satisfied stride of a man whose day had gone well. He would drive home now, probably stopping at Myers Market to pick up the evening paper like he did every Thursday. He would walk through our front door, kiss my cheek, ask about my day at the library. We would have dinner together, maybe watch Jeopardy, and he would hold my hand on the couch just like always. And I would have to sit there, pretending I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. Pretending my heart wasn't fracturing into pieces. Pretending that everything was still the same. Unless I didn't pretend. I reached for my purse with shaking hands and pulled out my phone. The camera app opened easily, and I raised it just as Walter's Cadillac backed out of his space. I took 3 photos of his car, the building, the private parking area, and the timestamp on my phone showing 2:58 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon when I should have been alphabetizing children's books. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then I started my engine and drove home, my mind already beginning to shift from the wounded wife to something else entirely. Something colder. Something more calculating. Because Dorothy Palmer had spent 35 years teaching 7-year-olds, and if there was one thing I'd learned in that career, it was this: when someone breaks the rules, you don't just react emotionally. You document everything. You gather evidence. You build an unshakable case. And then you respond with consequences they never saw coming. I parked my Buick in our driveway at exactly 3:45, the same time I always arrived home from the library on Thursdays. The house looked exactly as it had when I'd left that morning. The white shutters I'd painted last spring, the chrysanthemums I'd planted by the front steps, the welcome mat that said "Bless this home" in cheerful letters. Everything appeared normal, unchanged, solid. But I was different now. I could feel it in the way my hands didn't shake anymore as I turned off the ignition. In the way my breathing had steadied during the drive home. In the strange clarity that had settled over my thoughts like fresh snow covering familiar ground. Inside, I set my purse on the entry table and hung my cardigan on the coat rack. The house smelled faintly of the pot roast I'd put in the slow cooker that morning, a meal I'd made every other Thursday for more years than I could count. I walked through to the kitchen, past the photos lining the hallway, our wedding day in 1988, Art's baby pictures, family vacations to Wisconsin Dells, Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments captured and framed. How many of those smiles had been real? How many of those family gatherings had Helen attended while carrying this secret? I remembered her at Art's wedding 6 years ago, dancing with Walter at the reception, both of them laughing. Had it started by then? Or was that still innocent, still just a brother-in-law and sister-in-law enjoying a celebration? I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken. 3 clear images of the parking lot, Walter's Cadillac, the timestamp. Evidence, but not enough. Not nearly enough for what I was beginning to understand I needed to do. The front door opened at 4:30, right on schedule. Walter's footsteps crossed the entryway, and I heard the rustle of the newspaper he'd picked up at Myers Market. I'm home. In the kitchen, I called back, my voice remarkably steady. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, the same ritual I'd watched for 36 years. His hair had gone mostly gray, and he'd developed a small paunch that his suits hid well, but he was still the man I'd fallen in love with at a church picnic in 1986. Still the man who'd promised to love and cherish me, forsaking all others, until death did us part. How was the library? He kissed my cheek, and I managed not to flinch. The usual. We're planning the Halloween story hour. Mrs. Chen wants to do a Wizard of Oz theme. The lies came easily, surprisingly so. How was your day? Busy. Had to finalize the Morrison account paperwork. You know how demanding commercial policies can be. He poured himself a glass of water from the tap. Helen stopped by around lunchtime, actually. Needed some advice about her homeowner's coverage. I told her she's been overpaying for years with that company she's using. The audacity of it struck me like a physical blow. He was offering up Helen's presence voluntarily, wrapping their affair in the mundane language of insurance policies and professional advice. Creating an alibi I hadn't even asked for. That's nice of you to help her, I said, stirring the pot roast that didn't need stirring. She works so hard at that clinic. It's good she has family looking out for her. That's what family's for. Walter settled into his chair at the kitchen table, unfolding the newspaper. Oh, Art called my office today. Said he might have a question about contractor insurance for his firm. Good kid, thinking ahead like that. My hand tightened on the spoon. Art had called Walter's office after talking to me. Had he mentioned seeing Helen's car? Had he inadvertently tipped them off that someone was noticing their pattern? Did he say what kind of coverage he needed? Just general questions. I told him to swing by next week, and we'd go over everything properly. Walter glanced up from the sports section. You seem tired. Everything okay? Just a long day. You know how it is during planning season at the library. He accepted this without question, returning to his newspaper while I finished preparing dinner. We ate together at the kitchen table, discussing Art's daughters, the weather turning colder, whether we needed to have the furnace serviced before winter hit full force. Normal conversation, comfortable silence, the easy rhythm of a marriage that had lasted longer than many people's careers. Except none of it was real. Or rather, it was real for me but performance for him. How long had he been sitting across this table, eating meals I'd cooked, while conducting an affair with my sister? How many times had I confided in Helen about small worries or joys, while she kept this enormous secret locked away? After dinner, Walter settled into his recliner for Jeopardy while I cleaned the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see him calling out answers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. In 2 hours, we'd go to bed, and he'd kiss me goodnight, and tomorrow would begin again with the same comfortable routines. Unless I changed everything. I dried my hands on the dish towel and pulled out my phone, moving into the small home office we'd set up in the converted sunroom. The desk still held Walter's old insurance manuals and my teaching supplies that I'd never quite sorted through after retirement. I sat in the creaky chair and opened my contacts, scrolling until I found the name I needed. Frank Morrison had been our accountant for 23 years, ever since Walter's agency had grown large enough to need professional financial management. He was 64, planning retirement himself, and had a reputation for discretion that bordered on legendary in Maple Ridge's small business community. I typed out a text message, then deleted it. Too traceable. Too permanent. Instead, I dialed his number. Dorothy Palmer. Frank's voice carried genuine warmth. To what do I owe the pleasure? Please don't tell me Walter forgot to send me documents again. Actually, Frank, I need to ask you something confidential. Just between us. The warmth shifted to professional concern. Of course. What's going on? If someone wanted to understand the complete financial picture of a small business, what kind of information would they need? Hypothetically speaking. Frank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Dorothy, is this about Palmer and Associates? I'm just exploring options. Educating myself. I see. Another pause. Hypothetically, someone would need tax returns, profit and loss statements, accounts receivable and payable, payroll records, business bank statements, asset valuations, and any partnership or shareholder agreements. Wisconsin is a community property state, so both spouses have legal right to business information acquired during marriage. I pulled out a notepad and started writing. And if that business had been operating for 28 years? Then both spouses would have equal claim to its value, assuming it was built during the marriage with marital resources. Frank cleared his throat. Dorothy, I've known you and Walter a long time. If there's something I should know, not yet. But Frank, if I needed a complete audit of the agency's finances, could you do that? I could. Though I'd need a compelling reason to go through a client's books that thoroughly without their knowledge. It would need to be legal, above board. It would be. I just need to know what I'm looking at before I decide anything. Understood. Dorothy, I'll say this as your friend, not your accountant, be very careful. Whatever you're considering, make sure you have all the facts first. Don't act on emotion alone. I won't. Thank you, Frank. After we hung up, I sat in the dim office, listening to the familiar sounds of my home. Walter calling out another Jeopardy answer. The furnace clicking on. The old house settling around us. This place held 33 years of memories, since we'd bought it in 1991 when Art was still in elementary school. I'd picked out every paint color, hung every curtain, planted every flower in the garden. But community property meant it was half Walter's too. And if he'd been carrying on with Helen, if he'd been lying to me for months or longer, then I needed to know exactly what I was entitled to claim. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint checking account. Walter handled most of the finances, but I had access to everything. I'd just never had reason to look closely before. Why would I? I'd trusted him completely. The checking account showed normal activity, utilities, groceries, insurance payments, his business expenses. Nothing unusual. But there was a transfer to savings every month, $500 like clockwork. I clicked through to the savings account. The balance made me blink. $243,000. I sat back in my chair, staring at that number. We'd always lived comfortably but not extravagantly. Walter had told me the business was doing well, that his careful management over the years had paid off. But I'd had no idea we'd accumulated this much in savings. Or had we? I clicked deeper into the transaction history, scrolling back through months of deposits and withdrawals. Most were the routine $500 transfers. But scattered throughout were larger deposits, $10,000 in March, $15,000 in August, $8,000 in June. Bonuses, presumably. Commission on large commercial accounts. Walter had mentioned landing several major clients this year. But then I noticed something odd. Every large deposit was followed within days by a withdrawal of almost exactly half that amount. The $10,000 March deposit had been followed by a $4,800 withdrawal. The $15,000 August deposit by a $7,200 withdrawal. I clicked on one of the withdrawals. It showed as a transfer to an account number I didn't recognize. My heart began to beat faster. I clicked on another withdrawal. Same unknown account. And another. Same account, different amounts, but always roughly half of whatever large deposit had just arrived. Walter was moving money somewhere. Regularly, systematically, carefully. And he'd never mentioned it to me. I grabbed my phone and took screenshots of every transaction, every transfer, every strange pattern I could find. Then I logged into our credit card accounts. Again, mostly normal expenses, gas, groceries, restaurants. But Walter's card showed charges I didn't recognize. A jewelry store in Green Bay, $270 in September. A boutique hotel in Door County, $530 in July. Flowers from a shop I'd never heard of, delivered somewhere in Maple Ridge. None of these purchases had come home to me. I methodically photographed every suspicious charge, every unexplained expense, building a digital folder of evidence on my phone. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was financial deception on top of emotional betrayal. Dot? You coming to watch the news? Walter called from the living room. In a minute. Just checking email. I logged out of everything, cleared the browser history out of habit, and closed my laptop. When I joined Walter in the living room, he was already absorbed in the local news segment about road construction on Highway 42. I sat on the couch beside him, and he reached over to pat my knee absently, his attention on the television. This man, my husband of 36 years, was conducting an affair with my sister while systematically hiding money from me. The anger I'd expected to feel was absent, replaced by something colder and infinitely more useful, determination. I would need more than photos and bank records. I would need witnesses, documentation, professional validation of what I was discovering. And I would need to do it all without tipping them off that I knew. The news switched to weather. Cold front moving in, first frost expected by the weekend. Walter yawned and stretched. Think I'll turn in early tonight. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Busy how? I asked casually. Morrison wants to meet about expanding his coverage. And I've got that appointment with the Henderson family about their daughter's first car insurance. No mention of Helen. No indication that tomorrow might be another Thursday when my sister's car would appear in that back parking lot. Sounds like a full day, I said. I'll probably spend extra time at the library tomorrow. They need help setting up for the weekend book sale. That's nice of you, Dot. You're always so generous with your time. He kissed my forehead and headed upstairs. I stayed on the couch, listening to the sound of water running through pipes, the creak of floorboards overhead, the familiar sounds of my husband getting ready for bed. Tomorrow I would go to the library as planned. But I would also make some calls. Frank Morrison would be first, to set up that financial audit. Then I'd need to find a lawyer, someone discreet who specialized in divorce cases. And I'd need to document everything, building an unshakable case that would leave Walter and Helen no room to deny what they'd done. Because Dorothy Palmer might have been a second-grade teacher, but I'd also been a damn good one. I knew how to plan lessons, how to manage difficult situations, how to handle problems with patience and strategy rather than emotional reactions. And I knew this, the best teaching moments came when consequences were clear, inevitable, and impossible to escape. Walter and Helen were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Friday morning arrived with frost painting delicate patterns across the windows. I woke at 6:30, the same time I'd been waking for 40 years, and found Walter's side of the bed already empty. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen, another part of our long-established routine. I dressed carefully in slacks and a sweater, then headed downstairs. Walter sat at the table with his coffee and newspaper, reading glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up when I entered. "Morning. Coffee's fresh." "Thank you." I poured myself a cup and sat across from him, the same seat I'd occupied for thousands of breakfasts. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep well. Kept thinking about the Morrison meeting." He folded the paper and checked his watch. "I should head in soon, get a jump on the day. Before you go, I need to ask you something." I kept my voice light, conversational. "That savings account, the one with all the transfers, what's that for?" Walter's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Just for a second, but I caught it. Then he smiled, relaxed, picked up the mug. "Retirement planning. I've been moving money into a higher yield account. Didn't want to worry you with all the financial details." "Which bank?" "What? Which bank is the higher yield account with?" "I'd like to review our retirement planning, make sure we're on track." "Door County Savings and Trust. I can get you the statements if you want, but there's really nothing to worry about. I've got it handled." He stood, carrying his mug to the sink. "I really do need to get going." "Of course. Have a good day." He kissed my cheek and left through the garage. I listened to his Cadillac start, back out, drive away. Then I picked up my phone and called Door County Savings and Trust. "Good morning, I need to verify an account." I gave them Walter's social security number, which I'd memorized years ago from tax documents. "Can you confirm whether my husband has an account with your institution?" The representative put me on hold for several minutes. When she returned, her voice carried professional apology. "Ma'am, I'm showing no accounts under that social security number. Are you certain he banks with us?" "My mistake. Thank you." So Walter had lied to my face, smoothly and without hesitation. The account he was transferring money to wasn't at Door County Savings and Trust. Which meant he'd created that story on the spot, probably assuming I'd never check. I called Frank Morrison next. He answered on the second ring. "Dorothy. I was hoping you'd call back. Can you run that audit? I need to know everything about Palmer and Associates' finances. Every account, every asset, every liability. I'll need signed authorization from you as Walter's spouse. Can you come by my office this afternoon?" "I'll be there at 2. My next call went to Ruth Henderson, the only divorce attorney in Maple Ridge with a reputation for being both competent and discreet. Her practice operated out of a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, and she'd handled 3 divorces for teachers I'd worked with over the years. "Mrs. Palmer." Ruth's voice was warm but professional. "I wondered if I might hear from you eventually." The statement caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Small town, Dorothy. People talk. And when the same car shows up repeatedly at the same location at predictable times, eventually someone notices." She paused. "I'm sorry. This can't be easy. Can you see me today? Come at 4. And Dorothy, bring any documentation you've already gathered. The more organized you are from the start, the better position you'll be in." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee growing cold, looking around at the home I'd built with Walter. The curtains I'd sewn myself. The refinished table we'd found at an estate sale. The paint colors I'd agonized over, the decorations accumulated across decades. Every corner held a memory, and I had to decide which memories were real and which had been performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Coffee tomorrow? Haven't seen you much this week." I stared at those words, at the casual sister-to-sister affection they implied. Tomorrow was Saturday. Walter usually played golf on Saturday mornings with his regular foursome. Would Helen suggest meeting then, giving herself an alibi while she actually spent time with my husband? I typed back, "Sounds perfect. 10 o'clock at Larkspur Cafe?" Her response came immediately. "See you then." The Larkspur Cafe sat on the opposite end of town from the golf course. If Helen showed up for coffee, it would mean she wasn't with Walter. If she canceled or arrived late, it would tell me something else entirely. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning the house with methodical precision, scrubbing bathrooms and vacuuming carpets, keeping my hands busy while my mind processed everything I'd learned. At 1:30, I changed into more professional clothing and drove to Frank Morrison's office. His accounting firm occupied a small suite in a building near the courthouse. Frank met me in his private office, closing the door behind us. He was a stocky man with thinning hair and the patient expression of someone who'd heard every financial story imaginable. "Before we start, Dorothy, I need to tell you something." He gestured for me to sit. "I've been Walter's accountant for 23 years. What you're asking me to do puts me in an uncomfortable position. I understand. But I'm Walter's wife, and Wisconsin law gives me rights to information about marital assets." "You're absolutely right. Which is why I'm going to help you." He pulled out several forms. "But I want you to be prepared. Sometimes when we start digging into finances, we find things that are worse than expected." "I think I already know it's bad, Frank." "Maybe." He slid the authorization forms across his desk. "But knowing your spouse is unfaithful is different from seeing evidence that they've been systematically hiding assets. One is betrayal of the heart. The other is betrayal with legal and financial consequences." I signed the forms with a steady hand. Frank collected them and added them to a file folder that already had my name on it. "You started a file already?" "I started it yesterday after your call. I've known Walter a long time, and I've known you longer. When you called asking those questions, I knew where this was heading." He opened the folder. I took the liberty of pulling some preliminary information. Palmer & Associates' gross revenue last year was $840,000. The number stunned me. I had no idea the agency was doing that well. Net profit after expenses was roughly $320,000. Walter's been running a very successful operation. Frank pulled out another sheet. "But here's where it gets interesting. He's been declaring significantly lower income on your joint tax returns." "How much lower?" "He's been reporting personal income of about $160,000 annually. The rest stays in the business accounts, which is perfectly legal for a sole proprietorship. But it means the bulk of his income never appears on your joint returns. So I wouldn't know how much he was actually making." "Correct. And there's more." Frank pulled out bank statements. 3 years ago, Walter opened a business account at a bank in Green Bay. He's been transferring money there monthly. The account currently holds approximately $190,000. I thought about the transfers I'd seen in our savings account, the mystery account Walter had lied about this morning. Is that the account he's been moving money into? That's one of them. There's also a personal checking account in Green Bay under just his name. Another $78,000. Frank looked at me over his reading glasses. "Dorothy, your husband has been moving marital assets into accounts you don't have access to. He's been doing it systematically for at least 3 years." The coffee I'd drunk that morning turned sour in my stomach. Why would he do that unless he was planning something? That's the question I've been asking myself. Either he's planning to leave the marriage and wants to protect assets, or he's funding something he doesn't want you to know about. Like an affair with my sister. Frank's expression shifted to sympathy. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I know this isn't easy to hear. How much are we talking about in total? Everything he's hidden? Frank consulted his notes. Business accounts, personal accounts, the savings you do know about, estimated business value, property, vehicles, investments. Conservatively, you're looking at marital assets worth approximately $1.4 million. I sat back in my chair, the number incomprehensible. Walter and I lived comfortably but modestly. We drove practical cars, took occasional vacations, helped Art with his house down payment. We didn't live like people with over $1 million in assets. Half of that would be mine in a divorce? In Wisconsin, yes. Community property means equal division unless there are extenuating circumstances. And the fact that he's been hiding assets actually works in your favor. Judges don't look kindly on financial deception. What do I need to do? Frank pulled out a thick packet of documents. I'll need about 2 weeks to complete a full audit, but I can give you preliminary numbers sooner if needed. In the meantime, you should secure your own accounts. Open a separate checking account in just your name. Start documenting everything, his schedule, his whereabouts, any evidence of the affair. And talk to Ruth Henderson about freezing joint assets so nothing else disappears before you file. I left Frank's office at 3:30 with a folder full of financial documents and an entirely new understanding of my marriage. Walter hadn't just betrayed me emotionally with Helen. He'd been preparing for years to leave me with as little as possible, systematically moving money while I remained oblivious. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the second-grade teacher he'd married, assuming I'd never think to question him, never look closely at finances, never challenge the comfortable lies he'd been telling. Ruth Henderson's office was everything her reputation suggested, professional, organized, and designed to put nervous clients at ease. She met me in a consultation room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs, a box of tissues discreetly placed on the side table. Tell me everything, Ruth said, pulling out a legal pad. I told her about Arthur's phone call, about seeing Helen and Walter in the parking lot, about the bank accounts and transfers Frank had discovered. Ruth took notes with swift efficiency, occasionally asking clarifying questions. How long do you think the affair has been going on? I don't know. Months at least, based on what my son observed. Maybe longer. And Helen is your sister, which complicates things emotionally but actually helps legally. Family member affairs can demonstrate particular cruelty in divorce proceedings. Ruth set down her pen. Dorothy, I need to ask you something difficult. What do you want out of this? Are you hoping to save the marriage, or are you looking to end it? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about Walter kissing my cheek this morning, about Helen's text suggesting coffee tomorrow, about 36 years of shared history. I want the truth first. Complete, undeniable truth that they can't explain away or minimize. And then I want them to understand exactly what they've lost. Ruth smiled, a small sharp expression that made her look more like a prosecutor than a divorce attorney. Then we're going to document everything. We're going to freeze assets before he can move anything else. We're going to gather evidence until the case is airtight. And we're going to make sure that when this goes to court, there's no possibility of them claiming misunderstanding or innocent explanations. How long will that take? 2 to 3 weeks if we're thorough. Can you maintain appearances that long? Continue acting like nothing's wrong? I thought about teaching second graders for 35 years, maintaining classroom order through patience and planning. I can do whatever needs to be done. Good. Because Dorothy, when we move decisively. No warnings, no chances for them to prepare. We're going to serve Walter with divorce papers and asset freeze orders simultaneously, probably while he's at work. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to hide anything else. We spent the next hour going over strategy. Ruth would file preliminary paperwork but hold off on serving it until we had complete financial documentation. Frank would finish his audit. I would continue gathering evidence of the affair while maintaining normal routines. What about Helen? I asked. Can she be held legally responsible for any of this? Not in the divorce itself, but you could potentially file a separate alienation of affection lawsuit. Wisconsin still recognizes those claims. It won't get you much financially, but it would create a public record of her actions. I want her name on official documents. I want everyone in Maple Ridge to know exactly what she did. Ruth made another note. We can arrange that. Now, tomorrow's Saturday. You said Helen wants to meet for coffee? At 10. Walter usually plays golf Saturday mornings. Perfect opportunity to see if their stories align. Wear something with pockets that can hold your phone. Record the conversation if you can do so without her noticing. Wisconsin is a one-party consent state, so it's legal as long as you're present. I left Ruth's office as the sun was setting, the October sky painted in shades of orange and purple. My car sat in the parking lot exactly where I'd left it, but I was different now. I had a plan. I had professionals helping me. I had legal grounds and financial documentation. Walter and Helen thought they were being clever, meeting in parking lots, maintaining separate public relationships with me while conducting their affair in private. They thought I was the same trusting Dorothy who'd never question anything, who'd spent decades focused on teaching children and volunteering at the library. They were about to discover that patience and careful planning weren't just useful for managing second graders. They were exactly the skills needed to dismantle a conspiracy built on lies and hidden bank accounts. I drove home through the familiar streets of Maple Ridge, past the school where I'd taught for 35 years, past the church where Walter and I had been married, past the houses of friends and neighbors who would soon know everything. Walter's Cadillac was already in the garage when I arrived. Inside, I could hear him moving around the kitchen, probably starting dinner since I'd been gone longer than usual. There you are, he called when I came through the door. I was starting to worry. Where were you all afternoon? Just running errands. You know how it is, one thing leads to another. I set my purse down carefully, making sure the folder from Ruth's office stayed hidden inside. Did you have a good day? Productive. The Morrison meeting went well. He stirred something on the stove. I'm making spaghetti. Hope that's okay. Perfect. I moved to help him, falling into our familiar dinner preparation routine. Oh, I'm meeting Helen for coffee tomorrow morning. Haven't caught up with her in a while. Walter's hand hesitated for just a moment before reaching for the colander. That's nice. I've got my golf game, so the timing works out. It does, doesn't it? I smiled at him, the same smile I'd been giving him for 36 years. Everything always seems to work out perfectly. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of October day that made Maple Ridge look like something from a postcard. I dressed in comfortable jeans and a burgundy sweater, then carefully positioned my phone in my jacket pocket with the voice recorder app already open. Ruth Henderson's instructions played through my mind as I drove toward Larkspur Cafe. Stay calm, ask open-ended questions, let Helen talk. The cafe occupied a converted craftsman house on Maple Street, all exposed brick and mismatched furniture that the tourists found charming. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. The Saturday morning crowd was light, just a few regulars reading newspapers and a young couple absorbed in their laptops. Helen walked through the door at precisely 10 o'clock, her blonde hair freshly styled, wearing the navy dress I'd helped her pick out last month at Kohl's. She spotted me and waved, her smile bright and seemingly genuine. "There's my favorite sister," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I feel like I haven't seen you in forever." "It's only been a week, Helen." "Still too long. You know how I get when we don't catch up regularly." She signaled the waitress. "I need caffeine desperately. Rough night at the clinic yesterday." Mrs. Patterson came in with another mystery ailment. Took us 2 hours to convince her it was just indigestion. The waitress took our orders, coffee for both of us, and Helen launched into a detailed account of her week at the medical clinic where she managed the front office. I listened, watching her animated expressions, the way she gestured with her hands, the laugh lines around her eyes that matched mine. We'd gotten those same lines from our mother, who'd passed away 8 years ago. Had Helen already been sleeping with Walter then? Had she sat at Mom's funeral, holding my hand while I cried, all while carrying that secret? "You're quiet today," Helen observed after the waitress delivered our coffee. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about family. About how important it is to be honest with the people you love." Helen stirred cream into her coffee, not meeting my eyes. "That's kind of heavy for a Saturday morning. Where's this coming from?" "Walter and I have been married 36 years. Sometimes I wonder if we really know each other as well as we think we do." "Of course you do. You two are solid as they come." Helen sipped her coffee. "Is something going on between you and Walter?" "You can tell me, Dot. That's what sisters are for." The sheer audacity of it nearly made me laugh. "How often do you see Walter these days?" Helen's hand paused halfway to setting down her cup. "Just for a second, but I caught it." "What do you mean?" "I see him at family stuff, same as always." "I mean besides family gatherings. Do you ever stop by his office?" "Sometimes, if I need insurance advice." "Why?" Her voice had taken on a careful quality, each word measured. "Arthur mentioned seeing your car there. Said it's there pretty regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Helen laughed, but it sounded forced. "Your son needs to mind his own business." "Yes, I've been meeting with Walter about my insurance policies. He's been helping me restructure my coverage, save some money. It's not exactly exciting stuff, Dot." "On Tuesdays and Thursdays? The same days I'm at the library? Is there a problem with me getting insurance advice from my brother-in-law?" Helen's tone had shifted to defensive. "I didn't realize I needed to clear my schedule with you." "You don't. I just think it's interesting that you never mention these regular meetings. You tell me everything, Helen. What you had for lunch, what Mrs. Patterson said at the clinic, every detail of your life. But somehow you forgot to mention spending time alone with my husband every week." Helen set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to be honest with me." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "Are you having an affair with Walter?" The color drained from Helen's face. For several seconds, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Then she recovered, shaking her head with what looked like genuine shock. "That's insane. Walter's my brother-in-law. He's married to you." "I would never. How could you even think that?" "Because I saw you together Thursday afternoon. In the parking lot behind his office. You were buttoning your blouse, Helen. He touched your face. You blew him a kiss." Helen's hands began to tremble. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles going white. "You were spying on us?" "I was protecting my marriage." "How long has it been going on?" "Dot, listen to me." Helen reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled away. "It's not what you think. It just happened. We never meant for it to turn into anything." "How long?" Helen's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or performance. "About 8 months. It started last February. Walter came to the clinic for his annual physical, and we got talking, and I don't know, something just clicked. We started meeting for coffee, then lunch, and it just evolved. 8 months. While I'd been volunteering at the library, planning family dinners, being the good wife and sister, they'd been conducting an affair for 8 months. Does he love you? He cares about me. We have a connection, Dot. He understands me in ways nobody else does." Helen wiped at her eyes. "But he loves you too. This doesn't change what you have together. What we have together is based on trust and fidelity. Both of which are gone now." I kept my voice steady, clinical. "What was the plan, Helen? Were you going to keep this going indefinitely? Was he going to leave me for you?" "There was no plan. We were just taking things day by day, trying to figure out our feelings. While lying to me every single day. While sitting at my dinner table, sleeping under my roof during holidays, playing the devoted sister while sleeping with my husband. I never wanted to hurt you. Helen's voice broke. You have to believe that. I love you, Dot. You're my sister. If you loved me, you would have stayed away from my husband. Helen covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Several other cafe patrons glanced our way, then quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the obvious family drama unfolding. I sat quietly, watching my sister cry, feeling nothing but cold certainty. What are you going to do? Helen finally asked, her voice muffled by her hands. I'm going to divorce Walter. I'm going to make sure everyone in Maple Ridge knows exactly what you both did. And I'm going to take half of everything he tried to hide from me. Helen looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. He's been hiding money? You didn't know about that part? He's been moving assets into secret accounts for 3 years. Almost $300,000 that I'm not supposed to know about. He told me he was handling all the finances properly. That you'd be taken care of no matter what happened. Helen's expression shifted from guilty to confused. He said he was protecting you. He was protecting himself. Setting up a comfortable exit strategy while you played mistress. I stood, leaving a $10 bill on the table for my untouched coffee. I hope it was worth it, Helen. I hope those 8 months in parking lots and stolen afternoons were worth losing your only sister. Dot, please. We can talk about this. We can figure something out. There's nothing to figure out. You made your choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. I walked out of Larkspur Cafe into the bright October morning, leaving my sister sobbing at the corner table. My phone had recorded every word, every admission, every detail that would matter in divorce court. Ruth Henderson would be very pleased. The drive home took 15 minutes, and I spent them thinking about the phone call Helen would make the moment I left. She'd call Walter immediately, panicking, warning him that I knew everything. He'd leave his golf game, maybe meet her somewhere to coordinate their story. They'd scramble to figure out damage control, maybe move more money, definitely contact lawyers. But they were already too late. Frank Morrison had the financial records. Ruth Henderson had filed preliminary paperwork. I had recordings and photographs and bank statements. Every move they made now would only provide more evidence of their guilt. Walter's Cadillac was gone when I pulled into our driveway, which meant he was still at the golf course, still maintaining the appearance of his normal Saturday routine. I went inside and climbed the stairs to our bedroom, the room we'd shared for 33 years in this house. His closet held neat rows of suits, shirts organized by color, shoes lined up precisely. Everything in its place, orderly and controlled, just like the man who wore them. I pulled out my phone and took photographs of everything, his belongings, his side of the closet, the bathroom counter with his toiletries. Documentation that he still lived here, still maintained the appearance of our marriage. Then I went to his home office, the small room where he kept business files and personal documents. The desk was locked, but I knew where he kept the key, in a magnetic box stuck to the underside of the filing cabinet. Inside the desk, I found what I was looking for, files labeled with account numbers, statements from the Green Bay banks Frank had told me about, investment records showing assets I'd never known existed. I photographed everything, methodically working through each file folder. A 3-ring binder held what appeared to be financial projections, calculations of asset division, notes in Walter's handwriting about property valuations and retirement account splits. He'd been planning this divorce for at least 2 years, based on the dates on the documents. But he'd also been sloppy. Mixed in with the legitimate business files were printed emails between him and Helen. I sat down in his office chair and read through them, my hands steady despite what the words revealed. Helen's email from 6 months ago, can't wait to see you Thursday. I'll wear the blue dress you like. Walter's response, Dorothy's library day runs until 4. We'll have plenty of time. Another exchange from March, do you think she suspects anything? Helen had written. She doesn't pay attention to details anymore. Too focused on her volunteer work and grandchildren. We're safe as long as we're careful. Too focused on volunteer work. As if my dedication to the library and community somehow justified their betrayal. As if being a good person, a generous person, made me deserve what they were doing. I printed every email, added them to my growing folder of evidence, then carefully returned everything to Walter's desk exactly as I'd found it. Let him think his secrets were still safe. Let him believe I was still the trusting wife who didn't pay attention to details. My phone rang at 11:30. Walter's name on the screen. "Hi," I answered, keeping my voice normal. "I need to come home. Something's come up with the Morrison account." His voice sounded strained, tight with barely controlled panic. Helen had called him. "Is everything okay?" "Just business complications. I'll be home in 20 minutes. I'll be here." I spent those 20 minutes sitting in the living room with a book open on my lap, not reading, just waiting. When Walter's Cadillac pulled into the garage, I could hear the engine's agitation and how quickly he cut it off. He came through the door with his golf clubs still in the car, his face flushed from more than just the October cold. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "About what?" "Helen called me. She said you confronted her this morning, accused her of having an affair with me." "I didn't accuse her. I asked her directly, and she admitted it." 8 months, Walter. You've been sleeping with my sister for 8 months. He stood in the middle of our living room, still in his golf clothes, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not quite. Something closer to resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "It's not what you think," he started. Don't insult me with excuses or justifications. I saw you together. I heard Helen confirm everything. And I found your files, Walter. The bank accounts, the hidden assets, the financial planning for a divorce you've been preparing for years." His face went pale. "You went through my office?" "It's my office too. This is my house too. Everything in it is community property, including the evidence of your lies." I stood up, setting aside the book I hadn't been reading. "How long were you going to keep this up? Another year? 2? Were you waiting until you'd moved enough money that I'd be left with nothing?" I was protecting our assets. Making sure the business stayed intact. You were stealing from me. Systematically, deliberately, for years. The affair with Helen is almost secondary to that betrayal. Walter sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "What do you want, Dorothy?" "I want a divorce. I want half of everything you tried to hide. And I want everyone in this town to know exactly what you did. We can work this out. Go to counseling, rebuild trust." "Trust?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "You've been planning to leave me for 2 years while sleeping with my sister and hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars. What exactly is there to trust? 26 years of marriage before this. That has to count for something. It counted for everything until you decided it counted for nothing." I picked up my purse from the entry table. "I'm going to stay at Arthur's tonight. I suggest you use the time to find yourself a good lawyer, because on Monday morning, you're going to be served with divorce papers and an asset freeze. Every account you opened, every dollar you hid, all of it is going to be part of the public record. Dorothy, please. You should have thought about please when you were meeting Helen in parking lots. When you were touching her face and making plans behind my back. When you were calculating how to leave me with as little as possible." I opened the front door. 36 years, Walter. You threw away 36 years for an affair with my sister and some hidden bank accounts. I hope it was worth it. I walked out into the October afternoon, leaving my husband sitting alone in the living room we'd furnished together. My car started smoothly, the engine reliable as always, and I drove toward Arthur's house on the east side of town. The tears came finally, halfway there, but they were tears of anger more than grief. Anger at the wasted years, at the systematic deception, at my sister's betrayal and my husband's calculated theft. But underneath the anger was something else, a growing sense of clarity and purpose. Walter and Helen had made their choices. Now they would live with mine. Arthur opened his front door before I could knock, his face creased with concern. Behind him, I could hear my granddaughters playing in the living room, their laughter a sharp contrast to the heaviness I carried. "Mom, what's going on? You sounded strange on the phone. Can I stay here tonight?" "I'll explain everything, but I need to be somewhere other than that house right now." He stepped aside to let me in. His wife Caroline appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression shifting to alarm when she saw my face. "Girls, go play upstairs for a bit," Caroline called to the twins. Once they'd thundered up the steps, she guided me to the couch. "Dorothy, what happened?" I told them everything. Arthur's observation about Helen's car had been the thread that unraveled 36 years of marriage. I explained the affair, the hidden money, the emails I'd found, Helen's confession at the cafe. My son listened with growing anger, his jaw clenched tight, while Caroline kept a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That son of a," Arthur caught himself, glancing toward the stairs where his daughters had disappeared. "Mom, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what I was uncovering when I mentioned seeing her car, I would have handled it differently." "You did nothing wrong. You asked an innocent question that deserved an honest answer." I squeezed his hand. "Your father and your aunt are the ones who should be apologizing, not you." "What happens now?" Caroline asked quietly. "Monday morning, Walter gets served with divorce papers. Frank Morrison's completing a financial audit that will document every dollar Walter tried to hide. Ruth Henderson's handling the legal side. By the end of next week, everyone in Maple Ridge will know exactly what happened." Arthur stood and paced to the window, staring out at his front yard. "Aunt Helen won't show her face in this town again. And Dad, his reputation in the business community is finished. Nobody's going to trust an insurance agent who lies to his own wife. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because they need to face consequences for their choices. Real consequences, not just guilty feelings they can rationalize away." The weekend passed in a strange suspension of normal time. I slept in Arthur's guest room, helped Caroline with the girls, tried to maintain some semblance of routine. Walter called 17 times. I didn't answer. Helen sent 12 text messages ranging from apologetic to desperate to angry. I deleted them all without responding. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Ruth Henderson called at 8:15 to confirm that the process server was on his way to Palmer and Associates. By 9:30, Walter would know that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. Frank Morrison called at 10 with the completed audit. The numbers were even worse than preliminary estimates suggested. Over $400,000 hidden in various accounts, systematic underreporting of income, even a small property in Green Bay that Walter had purchased under a business entity I'd never heard of. "This is ironclad, Dorothy," Frank said. "Any judge will see this as deliberate financial misconduct. You're looking at more than half the marital assets, possibly damages for his deceptive practices." Ruth Henderson called 20 minutes later. "He's been served." According to our process server, Walter turned completely white when he read the papers. Asked if this was some kind of mistake. "The asset freeze is in effect as of this morning. He can't move, sell, or hide anything else." "What about Helen?" "I'm filing the alienation of affection lawsuit this afternoon. It'll be public record by end of business today. This is a small town, Dorothy. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know what happened." She was right. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone had 12 messages from friends expressing shock and support. The Maple Ridge Gazette ran a small item in their court proceedings section, listing the divorce filing and the accompanying lawsuit. No details, just names and case numbers, but in a town of 28,000 people, that was enough. Wednesday brought a call from Walter's lawyer, Bernard Jacobs, requesting a meeting to discuss settlement options. Ruth advised taking it, if only to see what they were willing to offer. We met Thursday afternoon in Ruth's conference room. Walter looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 days. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his usual confident demeanor completely shattered. Bernard Jacobs sat beside him with the grim expression of a lawyer who knew his client had no viable defense. "Mrs. Palmer," Bernard began, "my client wishes to express his deep regret for the pain he's caused. He's prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this matter quickly and quietly." "How generous?" Ruth asked. "Full disclosure of all assets, 60-40 split in Mrs. Palmer's favor, and a lump sum payment of $50,000 for emotional distress." Ruth looked at me. I looked at Walter, who couldn't meet my eyes. "No," I said simply. "Dorothy, please," Walter spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse. "I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything we built. But dragging this through court, making everything public, it's not going to change what happened." "You're right. It won't change what happened. But it will ensure everyone knows the truth. That you systematically lied to me for years. That you stole marital assets. That you conducted an affair with my sister while planning to leave me with nothing." I leaned forward. "You wanted to protect your reputation, your business, your comfortable life. I want justice. We go to trial, you lose everything anyway," Ruth added. "The evidence of financial misconduct is overwhelming. The judge will award Dorothy at least 60%, possibly more. Plus attorney fees, court costs, and the public exposure you're trying to avoid. My client's offer is simple: 70-30 split, full asset disclosure, and a public apology acknowledging your actions." Bernard whispered frantically with Walter for several minutes. Finally, Walter nodded, defeated. "We'll accept those terms." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I walked away with $780,000, the house, and one of the vehicles. Walter kept his business but lost most of his major clients once word spread about the financial deception. Last I heard, he'd closed Palmer & Associates and taken a job with a regional insurance company in Green Bay. Helen moved to Minnesota 2 months after everything became public. We haven't spoken since that morning at Larkspur Cafe. Arthur says she calls him occasionally, trying to maintain some connection to family, but he keeps the conversations brief and never mentions me. The house feels different now. Quieter, but honest. I volunteer at the library 4 days a week, have coffee with friends who stood by me, and spend weekends with Arthur's family. The granddaughters ask sometimes why Grandpa doesn't come to dinner anymore. Arthur tells them that sometimes grown-ups make choices that change families, and that's just part of life. 6 months after the divorce, I was organizing the hall closet when I found an old photo album from our early years together. Walter and me at the Wisconsin State Fair in 1987. Our wedding day. Art's first birthday. I looked at those photos for a long time, at the young couple who'd believed in forever, and felt something close to peace. The marriage had been real once, even if it ended in betrayal. The years of teaching had been meaningful. The family I'd built with Arthur still existed. Walter and Helen's choices had changed my life, but they hadn't destroyed it. I closed the album and tucked it back on the shelf. Some memories deserve to be kept, even painful ones. They reminded me of who I'd been, who I'd become, and who I refused to let their betrayal turn me into. Dorothy Palmer, 58 years old, divorced, financially secure, and finally, completely honest about every aspect of her life. It wasn't the ending I'd expected, but it was the one I'd earned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.